Hello, I'm Oscar Young. I'm here at Stanley Gibbons at 309 The Strands, and I'm one of the specialists in the auction department. And today, I thought we would look at the stamp that was the successor to the penny black, one that saw huge amount of usage from its first introduction in 1841 and was used right up until 1879. And of course, this stamp has to be the humble penny red. This stamp, in its 38 years of issue, saw numerous variations and changes in not just the progression of stamps and their technology, but attitudes towards stamps and even the emergence of collecting. This stamp was used all over the world and, as far as we know, probably graces the album pages of almost every collector. And in its time as well, it was used extensively in trials as well, building up the level of knowledge that people had about stamps. To look at the penny red, we must look at the penny black. The clue is in the name. As the world's first postage stamp, it caused the communication revolution that we enjoy today. But there was a slight problem. Because the penny black being a black stamp, it's quite inconspicuous. And the cancel that was originally used on the penny black, the Maltese cross, was originally done in red. Now, this also had the advantage of being able to see a red cancel on the black stamp. Problem was, though, you could actually clean off the red cancel. And to prevent fraudulent reuse, the post office then changed and said, right, you must use black ink, which is cheaper and more permanent than the red cancel that's previously being used. But then you had another problem. How could the postal clerks and say people who are receiving letters, so again, you have to remember, stamps are high technology at this point. People still don't quite recognize or even trust them at some points. So they then decided, after much deliberation, that they must change the color of the stamp itself. So the penny black in 1841 became the penny red. And I have a mint example here, issued in 1841. Now, of course, it's quite a classic design. It is, in effect, the penny black, just a different color. And in fact, the first penny reds were printed from black plates. So there are occasions where you can actually match up the penny blacks with the penny reds and vice versa. Here we have a penny black and a penny red. In fact, you actually may remember this one. This is our humble friend, the plate 11, who was in our last video about penny blacks. And this is actually a penny red from the same plate 11 plate, from the same numbers, EJ, the same position from the same plate, but just in the different colors. And it is quite a challenge to be able to match them up like this, but I know many collectors who enjoy doing so, and it's quite nice when sort of you see that they have matched them, and it's almost like a lightning strikes twice sort of feeling, and it's quite interesting to look at. But overall, the first penny reds saw, again, other forms of changes and usages. And as you can see here, there are quite an example that I have sort of pulled out for you. The first penny reds, of course, we've got a lovely unused example here. Now, I expect you were wondering, what is a mint penny red worth? Now, penny red saw huge print figures done, even exceeding that of the penny black, which was 68 million. So it's quite natural that mint examples are not as worth as much as a mint penny black, as you may remember. So this one here is worth about £800. So an unused penny red is about £800, which is a fraction of what a really nice mint example of penny black is worth. Used examples are a lot more common. Again, it's saw greater usage. And so these can range from as little as £5 up to about £30 or £40. Again, not that much, but they are still a very fascinating area. And so I know people who only collect penny reds. And so again, it's a huge spectrum. If everyone really wants to specialize in penny reds, then of course you're going to need a copy of our Queen Victoria Volume 1, Part 1. And this catalogue is absolutely invaluable for anyone collecting GB and line engraved. But also looking at the penny reds, we can see this rather interesting stamp here, which is almost like a sort of ghostly image of the Queen's head peering out from this blue. Well, this is actually a feature that was done to these penny reds and against forgery. And it is known as the ivory head. And it appeared on this issue of the penny red and the later one, which we will look at. And so the ivory head was as a consequence of adding a particular sort of mineral substance called prussate of potash, which is a very complicated name, but basically in effect what it did was it reacted with the ink to cause this bluing to the paper. And as you can see on this pair here, you can see where the ink is, and this sort of very palish blue surrounding the stamp and the marginal inscription here. And you can get lots of different degrees of this bluing, and you can get some very light ivory heads and very more pronounced ivory heads. So this one is quite a strong reaction of an ivory head. You can almost make out a lot of the detail of the Queen's head. And if I turn this pair over, you can see that the reaction isn't as strong and still quite relatively pale, but again, quite interesting. Ivory heads, do they add much to the value of a penny red? Not really, but they are very interesting. And we quite often see them when people, of course, have mounted the penny reds in their albums, and then they've mounted these backwards so that they can show off the ivory heads. So that's always quite interesting to see. So again, that was the first penny red, and that was issued for just under 14 years. But in that time, technology advanced and perforations began to appear on stamps. And of course, perforations are how we much recognize stamps today, with the holes on the outside, almost the jagger bits around them, as we describe to some people. And of course, that aided separation. It was a much easier system than cutting them out with long scissors. And you can remember, if you saw the last video, how difficult it was for me to cut out those stamps. I would not have cut it as a postal clerk in the 1840s. But in 1854, the perforation technology had again advanced, and after the Archer trials, which again is you can read more about in the volume 1, part 1, the new stamps that were issued were essentially the same, but perforated. And these are known as the penny stars, and their range, and we'll come to the reason why their name is called that later on. But as you can see, they are effectively the same design, but just perforated. And in this time, they saw again quite a long period of usage. And of course, having perforations made it much easier for the postal clerks to separate them. But you also had another problem. Perforation is still very much high technology, and they couldn't quite get it right. And so quite often you find these misaligned perforated examples. And we have a block of 8 here, which you can see where the perforator has not quite been aligned properly. So you have the central margins here, and the perforator has sort of gone to the other side slightly. It hasn't quite been aligned properly. So perfectly centered examples of these penny reds are very difficult to get hold of, but they're still very rare and still very desirable. In fact, this block of 8 here is actually worth about £3,000, even with that misaligned perf. But again, it's a very scarce piece, and very beautiful it is too. And there are 2 used examples down here which also illustrate how often we see penny reds, particularly the penny stars, where they've been misaligned perforated. And they're interesting. They don't necessarily add much to value. In fact, they don't necessarily even detract from value. It's just the way they were done. And it wasn't really until sort of the 1860s and 70s when they really began to understand how to work perforators, and even then, sometimes the results weren't that great. So what came next? Well, in 1864, the last issue of penny reds was introduced, and the design had changed slightly from its predecessors. And it saw the introduction into the northeast and northwest corners letters. And these are the same letters which are at the bottom, but in reverse. And these are called letters in all 4 corners. Now, the last penny reds are undoubtedly one of the most common stamps in the world. In fact, from a large number of plates, ranging from plate 71 all the way to 225, some 13,430,000,000 were printed. So this is by far not a rare stamp at all. But there are exceptions to that rule, as with any stamps, and with all good stamp stories, it starts right back at the printers. Now, these stamps were printed by Perkins Bacon from copper plates, as the same with the penny blacks, as the same with the early penny reds. But the design of these ones was altered, not just to have all letters in all 4 corners, but also you could read the plate number in the margins of the stamps. And on the either sides, you have these ornate margins, and in between them, you'll have small numbers telling you the plate number. So this one here is plate 81. And the value of these penny reds very much depends on the value of which plate, because some plates are better than others. So the most scarce plate that you tend to see all the time is this one down here, which is plate 225. And this is one that's, when we say all the time, it's far more common than the one I'm going to talk to you about. And this one here, plate 225, now that on its own, because only 3,000 sheets were printed of plate 225. So we have a mint single and a used pair. So this single here, we price it at £3,000. So it pays to have a 225 in the collection. And this pair here is probably worth about 1,000 itself. It's not as valuable as a mint type, but it is still very rare. And again, very attractive it is too. Despite this stamp being printed in huge figures and even scarcer plates being in amongst the other ones that were printed, there is one that's the exception. It's a stamp that many collectors can only ever dream of owning because of its scarcity, and in fact it's one of the greatest rarities in the philatelic world, and that is of course the infamous plate 77. The story of plate 77 is etched very much into the fabric of philately. It's considered one of the great rarities of the world, and its story is equally as interesting. Back at Perkins Bacon, they had printed the plates for all the penny reds as they had done before, but there were a few plates that were rejected, mainly because they were misengraved, malformed, that the quality just wasn't very good, and these plates were rejected. But plate 77 had managed to go to the press, and some examples were printed from the plate. And somehow, by accident or design, some got out and were used or unused. And of course, plate 77 is such a rare stamp. Only 9 examples are known to exist. 4 unused and 5 used examples are thought to populate this earth and are highly prized by collectors alike. There is one in the Royal Collection, there is one in the Taplin Collection, which is held in the British Library, and it's always worth a look if you ever get the chance. There was possibly one even in the great collector Ferrari's collection, but that is disputed. And of course, there was one that was lost in the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. So really, it's probably only about 8 in the world, and there are others which haven't come on the market in over 50 years. We were very fortunate to handle one about 10 years ago or more, on piece with a 4p vermilion, and we sold that for over £500,000. So that shows you immediately how valuable and prized and rare this stamp is, and it's considered one of the great rarities of the world and eclipses the value of all the stamps that I've shown you previously, even the penny blacks. Collectors are warned, however, about plate 77, as there are only 8 or 9 in the world. Plate 77 is not without its imposters. There are cases where people have brought in facsimile examples of plate 77s for us to look at. In fact, some people have brought in genuine penny reds, but from the wrong plates entirely. Some people have misread the plates, or they've been cancelled so hard and obliterated part of the design you can't read the plate numbers properly. The most common examples that we see of people coming into the shop, showing us pictures online of penny reds, are usually from plate 71, plate 79, plate 171, and even plate 177. The latter you can understand, as there is 77 in there, and we have unfortunately disappointed many people. But it's needless to say, collectors are warned against anything or purchasing anything which is potentially said to be a plate 77. Always purchase these stamps from reliable dealers if your pocket money can extend to perhaps over £250,000. And it's always worth getting a second opinion if you suspect any stamp to be plate 77. And if you're purchasing one, make sure it's a reputable dealer. And if it's too good to be true, it probably is. I hope this has given you a brief overview of the complex and interesting world of penny reds. They saw a huge amount of usage and have been highly prized and studied by collectors in the 100 or so odd years since they've been issued. And the red colour is still with us. It was adopted by the penny for Edward VII's and George V's and even George VI's reign. And even now, the first class stamp of Queen Elizabeth II is red in homage to this most incredible of stamps, where its prices can range from a few pence right up into the hundreds of thousands. As always, please like and subscribe for more Stanley Gibbons content.